goes to the government of Manitoba and Saskatchewan and Ontario and the government of Canada. And the people who are employed at all those businesses are not Native people. They're all non-Native people, all right? And that's been the game. Now, in Russia, there's an old term. In the old communist Russian country, the government started all these businesses, and the businesses were terrible. They weren't really meant to be competitive businesses building something like a car or whatever on the world market. They were meant just to employ people. And so there was an old saying, which is, they pretend to pay us, because they paid very poorly. They pretend to pay us, and we pretend to work. And all the businesses in Russia under the communist regime were terrible. They weren't competitive. They built something, it fell apart. But the state paid for everything, and that's the way it was meant to be over there. Over here with First Nations people, we were put on reserves to live separate than society. And you don't see very many big buildings on a reserve, do you? And you don't see a whole lot of big giant businesses. You don't see General Motors on Peguis, do you? Because we're not meant to be employed there. We're meant to be unemployed. And why is that? I'll tell you why it is. Because the more education we get, and the smarter we get, and the more unified we get, we test the law. We're subject to a set of laws. And every now and then we win a very small case. And because we just don't believe the law is right. We know that there's some unjust moral thing that's happening where we shouldn't be living in poverty. And what's happened is that we are excluded from society. That's why we live on reserves. We are not supposed to live with everybody else. We were put over here to be separate. And what that implies is this. It means that we're not part of the systems of society. We're not part of the economic system. We're not really part of the government system. We've been meaningfully put over here to be different, to be kept from the fact and the knowledge that this is our land, these are our resources, and we should be benefiting. Now, in the last 10 years, there have been 4 Supreme Court cases. The Delgamuukw, Taku, Haida, and Mikisew cases, and they have created something called the duty to consult and accommodate. And that means when a corporation or a government, it's the law for the government to obey, when they're impacting you or your traditional lands or on your reserve, they're cutting down trees or mining, that they have a duty to consult with you. Really what the duty should be is the duty it should be to revenue share with you and for you to give you a piece of the business, a piece of equity. But they're never going to give it to us. No, 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 no. You have to fight for it. And our people have been struggling and fighting, and we live in these very confused lives and times. So our leaders say, be traditional. What does that mean? Well, at 100 years from now, we're going to be very different than now. 20 years ago, when I started the National Aboriginal Achievement Foundation, I didn't have a computer. We didn't have computers in the early 80s. They just happened. And then they had these cell phones that were like this big. A Fred Flintstone cell phone. You had to carry it like this. Well, look how things have changed so quickly. So is it traditional for a native to have a cell phone? I don't know. That's not the kind of Indians I knew when I grew up. We didn't have cell phones, so that must be a bad thing. The truth of the matter is this. It's not a bad thing for a First Nations person to do whatever he or she wants to do because we're free as people in this life, and you can be First Nations, you can be Jewish, you can be Swedish. That's what you're born with, and that's fine and that's great. It comes with a language, it comes with a history, it comes with customs, comes with foods. That's wonderful. So what? Then you become something. You are a temple. You are a person, and you either fill your body and mind and soul with knowledge, with power, with a direction in life, or you don't. And for those people that do, those people are a lot happier. Now, I'm going to tell you something. I've worked very, very hard. People are afraid of hard work. You're going to work hard one way or the other. You're either going to work hard for something you want to do and you want to believe in, and you're going to suffer for it, or you're going to have to work for somebody else. Clarence Lewis said, you know, be careful about the nerd. He's going to be your boss. You'll either do something that you want to do, or you'll be forced to work for someone else doing something you don't want to do, and you're going to be even more unhappy. So for me, I decided to struggle and have a difficult time doing what it is that I believed in, doing what it is that I wanted to do, that I thought would make a difference. So education is very important. We hear that. Education, it is very important. Education is knowledge, and knowledge is power, and power is money, and power and money and knowledge can take you places wherever you want to go. There is nothing that you should not envision, and there is nothing you cannot do as a Native person. People say, oh, no, you have to be traditional. Well, what does that mean, I have to be traditional? I've raised more money for Native people from corporations than any other Native in this country. Well, thank you. Thank you. I wasn't really looking for applause. Most people say, well, you're not very traditional. Yeah, well, how much money have you raised? All right? It doesn't matter. You know, I am First Nations. I can go back and trace my lineage. I'm very proud of being Mohawk. I've worked very hard to make a difference in the Aboriginal community. I like the symphony orchestra. I don't like hockey. I think I've watched a couple of hockey games. I lived in New York City. So I'm a different sort of guy, but that's okay. No one can tell me that I'm not a Native. No one can tell me I'm good or bad. No one can tell me anything. I know who I am. I'm actually happy who I'm at. I've had some very wonderful times. I've had some difficult times. And it's what you want to be. It's what you want to do. But if you want to make a difference in your community, every young person, I want to do something for my community. I want to make a difference. You have got to get empowered. You have got to get an education. Do you know what? I kind of agree with Chief Louis. Do you know what I'd do if I were you, if I had to do it over again? I'd go into finance. In my company right now, I have access to millions and millions of dollars. And if I had known that 30, 40 years ago, I would have gone into finance. And it's not as hard as you think. It's really not as hard as you think. Everything I've ever done in life, people said, oh, he can't do that. You'll never do that. You'll be a failure. You'll be a... When I started 25 years ago, I decided to create, in those days, the Canadian Native Arts Foundation. That became the National Aboriginal Achievement Foundation. I said, how come our young people aren't architects? How come they're not known as great artists in the mainstream? How come we're not known? How come we're not, why aren't we in the workforce? And I created a foundation. And everybody said, you'll never create a foundation. And I decided I was going to produce big concert events like all the big charities in Toronto and in the big cities. I was going to produce big charity events like everybody else. And the chiefs made fun of me, and all of the Aboriginal people that I knew made fun of me. My own brother made fun of me. Huh. Anyways, they said, look, you don't know how to run a charity. You're not a producer. You've never raised $1 million. Well, there's a first time for everything, folks. The truth of the matter is, I just worked very hard at it. People said to me when I started having success, well, you know that John Kimbell? I don't know how he does it. He's not very smart. He's not a very smart guy. Did you ever talk to him? He's not that smart. Well, that's true. And you know what my answer to them was? My answer was this. While you're sitting at home drinking beer and watching hockey on Saturday and Sunday, I'm at the office and I'm working. And while you're working 30 hours a week, I'm working 60 hours a week. And when you work 40 hours a week, I'm working 80 hours a week. And I'm not very smart, but I'm going to out-hustle you. And I out-hustle just about everybody. And that's how I raise the most money. And you can learn anything. If you don't know something, people said to me when I first started, I was going to produce a big concerts, which I did. And I didn't know how to do it. And people said, you'll never do that. You'll go bankrupt. Well, you know what? When I didn't know the answer to something, I found out who had the answer, and I'd go meet with them, and I'd beg them to tell me the answer. And I learned. Any of you could become much more than you actually think you could. When I produced my first concert, I personally borrowed $100,000. I had no office, I had no staff, no government support, and I went out, I hired a movie star, which was very hard. There's a whole story there. I don't have time for that. And it worked, and it happened. And you could do that as well. Knowledge is power, and power can take you places. We're never going to get out of our dilemma the way we're doing things now. And our communities, it's a very tough decision for you as a young Aboriginal person. Do I stay in my community? Do I leave?